Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in for Housing Today with Kayla. And we're talking about the Ontario Landlords Watch report on issues, our top 5 issues and solutions. And I brought friends with me today. Quentin, who looks like he's like, okay, what's going to go on? Because he has no clue. This is going to be a open conversation to talk about the top issues and the solutions. And we're going to narrow it down to a couple of categories. And hopefully we can cover it within the hour. The first one, we're going to talk about the landlord and tenant board. So issues that are happening with the landlord and tenant board and solutions that we're going to kind of recommend in order to streamline the process to make it a little bit more easier for landlords and tenants and just all around general to make sure that all parties are getting access to justice. I have sent out the invite for the elected officials and candidates to tune in to this kind of discussion that we're having so that when they are on the campaign trail, and obviously housing is such a popular topic for every election, federal, provincial, and municipal, we want them to hear from the investors themselves on what we can consider the issues are and what we're going to try to propose in a way to help create a fair and balanced housing system for good landlords, good tenants, and including the taxpayers. So before we get started, I really want to go around the table really quickly because I know we have a lot to cover. So I'll start off with Quentin, if he can just say who you are, where you're from, how long you've been doing this for, and then we'll keep the train going.
Sure. My name is Quentin D'Souza. I've been an investor since 2004, and I've been in all types of rental units. I've been a landlord in all types of rental units, from single family homes, duplexes, up to small apartment buildings. And I've written a couple books too. 5.
Oh, only a couple.
6, actually. 6.
We've read your books, Quinn. We have to get that to the community. So make sure we get you got some time while everyone's talking, put it in the comments so people can find your books.
Sure.
Awesome. Tom, thank you so much, buddy. We've been doing this for quite some time, advocating for almost 12 years and definitely doing conferences and having roundtable discussion. And I'm telling you, you're a wealth of knowledge. Is he frozen? I thought he was really happy. Okay, so we're going to come back to Tom. This is why we need live in-person events for situations like this. So let's jump over to Melissa.
Hey, Kayla, thanks for having me here. I'm at the trailer myself, so I'm hoping my connection holds okay. So I've been a real estate investor for quite some time now, probably 10 or so years. And the past couple of years, I've also been running a property management company. So I think I've got a pretty wide variety of experience across the board. And also the part of being an investor and having a number of properties, you kind of, I don't know, you get in it, right? So there's definitely a lot of experience there and looking forward to joining you.
Thank you so much, Melissa, for joining me tonight and trying to, give a definitely perspective of being a landlord and property manager. And we have Connie Cody. If anyone who knows Connie Cody, she was the record candidate. She's running for the Conservatives for the federal government. Connie, thank you so much for taking the time on your vacation to join in and talk about housing. I know you've been my right hand in all the crazy ideas that I have and really helping me sort it all out, really.
Well, hi, Kayla. Yes, it's great to be here. And you kind of introduced myself, but as you said, I've been with you for a decade now, helping with working towards solutions and advocating on housing. I'm heavily involved as a volunteer in the community, and a lot of issues are with people with affordability. And so my involvement has started in municipal politics and went up to federal politics. And housing, I think, is one of the biggest issues that really needs serious resolutions.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Connie, for joining us. And then part of the right hand, we got my left hand. Well, she's on my right side now. But we have
Darlene.
Just Darlene, just like J-Lo.
Yeah, so I'm an investor. I've been an investor since 1992. I'm also a property manager, and I've done that since 2011. So like Melissa, lots of experience, lots of stories, and that kind of thing. And the whole goal is to make a partnership between the landlord, between the tenant, and we're the in-between, so make everything go smoothly. And then, of course, you have the problems with the landlord-tenant board, which we're going to talk about. That's why we're here.
This is great. I know a lot of people think from, candidates, it's about the rezoning, or it's just about the developments, and it's always not the case when it comes down to the issues that the landlords are facing in Ontario, resulting them into wanting to exit it out of Ontario, getting themselves into other provinces or in other states. So we're going to start off with the Landlord and Tenant Board. I have a couple of books. I'm not usually the type of person to read from a paper, but we have a lot to cover, and I really want to make sure that everyone has a deep understanding of the type of recommendations that we want to kind of put forward. So from the Landlord and Tenant Board, there's a few issues that are happening at the Landlord and Tenant Board. Number one is the rental applications. So the rental applications that are happening that you have to file, and you have to file them, most of them now are online. When you're going through the Landlord and Tenant Board, you're filing only the L1, the L2 applications are available online, but we have many other forms. It's like a whole alphabet of applications that landlords and tenants can file, and they need to be adjusted so that they're more user friendly. There's a lot of people who are having complications with their forms at the Landlord and Tenant Board, resulting into the forms being thrown out at the Landlord and Tenant Board, and having the landlord or the tenant have to restart the process all over again. So a recommendation from the Landlord and Tenant Board is that they do need to make them user friendly, but it's not just for the concept of having these forms being user friendly. It's about how are they filing them, because a lot of people are having difficulties knowing the process. So there has to be more of an educational portion in order to educate the landlords and the tenants in how to do it, which they've involved getting themselves into Navigate Tribunals Ontario, where it can allow the landlords to pick a situation of what they're dealing with, and it brings up their resources. I love to see that has been an improvement, but again, there's still other issues that are just falling in that gray area that we're not able to address at the Landlord and Tenant Board. The applications at the Landlord and Tenant Board, whenever you're filing an application at the Landlord and Tenant Board, and I can probably want to reach out to Tom on this one. So when we're doing a non-payment of rent, and let's say that the tenant has caused reasonable enjoyment, ruining the reasonable enjoyment of other tenants or the landlord of the property, we're filing two separate applications at the Landlord and Tenant Board. And we're not always having one hearing to address all the applications on that one type of tenant. Tom, what was your experience dealing with that type of situation at the Landlord and Tenant Board?
So they're making me file 2 times, and I'm having to pay the application twice, and they're not being heard on the same day. So sometimes, depending on the adjudicator, they'll actually realize you actually have 2 cases, and they'll say, since we're not having both cases heard today, we want to adjourn this until we can have a time that we can do both cases. So it's wasting the tenant's time and the landlord's time, and just wasting resources overall.
So when you look at the overwhelming backlog at the Landlord and Tenant Board, and only 24 hours in a day based on the operation business hours, we're seeing the same tenant and the landlord at the Landlord and Tenant Board being able, it's all about getting that eviction process started, but they're obviously not including it. So our recommendation would be that the landlord and the property manager are able to, or the property manager is going to be able to have all their hearings for that in particular tenant being heard once. But at the same time, we also have a problem with having the hearing being heard, and they have about maybe 3 hours, I've heard. Melissa, you could probably talk about this one. When you're at the Landlord and Tenant Board hearing, one, you're logging on at either 9 o'clock or 1 o'clock for your hearing, but you're waiting such a long period of time. How long are the cases being how long is it taking for the adjudicator to go through that one in particular hearing? So there's a time frame, but the time frame is extremely long. We still have her. I think we still have her. She's on mute.
Sorry, Kayla, it's super choppy on my end here. I'm assuming everyone else is okay. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, you're a little choppy, but you're good. Go outside.
Shoot. I'm trying to see if taking out videos better. Bear with me for a second. Let me see if I can get a better signal. I'm sorry if you can pass.
No, it's okay. Okay, we'll get back to you on that one. The landlords at the landlord and tenant board, it's the reason why we have to go through what's happening at the landlord and tenant board is because we have so many situations that are happening for the landlord and the tenant. And when a cost is pushed to a landlord, or the tenant is not being removed out of the property for a long period of time, now we have a concept of the legal fees that are associated with that. So we're seeing a lot of discouragement of investors from wanting to get into the industry because of the way that the landlord and tenant board is acting and running their rules and procedures. So when it comes down to these scheduled dates, which I think we'll get Melissa in on how long it actually takes to cover one hearing at the landlord and tenant board, resulting in other cases being adjourned because certain cases actually took a very long period of time.
I'll just say that it simply takes far too long. I mean, we've seen situations where, you know, I've seen tenant legal rep claim to not have enough time to review information. They defer hearings and on priority status, and it takes 3 months to reschedule it. That's completely unacceptable when you've already been granted an expedited hearing. Any kind of non-straightforward application, so if it's an N5 and 6 on 7, there's usually an abundance of evidence that needs to be provided or should be provided. Those can take some time, but even for simple N4 L1 applications, they are pretty straightforward. The rent has been paid or it hasn't. There's a mitigating circumstance or there isn't. But why does it take 3, 4, or 5 hours to get through these? And then you're kicking the can down the road and really leaving landlords out thousands of dollars, and also potentially other really great tenants dealing with problems within their community and within their house. I mean, we know that we typically see more multi-unit housing than we have ever before, less single-family homes rented. Not necessarily a bad thing, but it does mean people are living closer together. And so
and we lost her. This is going to really work into my big announcement at the end of this. We'll get her back. So again, it's going to be about the time consuming that it's taking for the landlords to actually have their case, taking up a very valuable time from the adjudicators. And we got to look at the concept of what is bogging down the landlord and tenant board system. And we're going to get into that in a little bit. But right now, from the landlord and tenant board, when a landlord does have an issue at the landlord and tenant board, they cannot, just appoint anybody that they want to go and represent them. They are forced to represent themselves if they don't have the knowledge, or they have to hire legal aid, or sorry, not legal aid, a paralegal. But the tenants are also allowed to, they get free legal aid themselves. So this is where we would also like to make a recommendation of the government to allow a landlord to appoint whomever they feel is fit in order to speak on their behalf at the landlord and tenant board in order to help save the cost. If they're saving the cost to the landlord, then we're going to be able to save the cost down to the tenants, and we're going to make it a very friendlier atmosphere for the landlords when they don't feel that they're forced to hiring any paralegals. Quentin, what do you think about that?
Yeah, you know what? I think that there are some ways that I think that we can make the process more efficient. I can tell you, I have 3 L1s that were filed, 1 in December, 2 in January, and I still don't have a hearing date. I don't even have a hearing date for December filing, and that's pretty ridiculous. So I would expect within when I file an order, especially if it's electronic, that I should be able to be given a date right away. And I don't think that we have what I would call, just being able to get our things heard in a timely manner, which would be, I think in any sort of hearing situation, it would just be like a natural thing, right? That you would want to be heard within a few weeks or a few days, or at least get a date. I can't believe that I've been over 4 months without a date. Like, we're going into May now, and I still don't have a date from December.
And you're not even through the process yet. So once you even get your hearing date, now you have the challenges that are kind of come to that. So
Yeah, I don't know what to do when it comes to the landlord tenant board. It's a broken system for sure. The other thing is that it should be a default judgment when it comes to non-payment issues. I don't think that there needs to be this. If you wanted to make the process more efficient, get rid of more than half of the hearings that are being done at the landlord tenant board, which are really L1 non-payment issues, right? Like I would say that of like, let's say there's 80,000 applications that are filed by both tenants and landlords, 45,000 would be regarded non-payment. If you want to get rid of the problem, eliminate half of those situations or more than half by default judgment on non-payment. I don't think that it's necessary to go through that process. Now, if there is some sort of something illegal or something that was done that perhaps shouldn't have been done, there is process through once a judgment is given, you can always a tenant can always go back and take that judgment and argue it, right? And again, go back through the process if necessary. So instead of the way that we're doing it, just eliminate half of those cases that are brought in front of somebody and default judgment. I mean, you can see in other places like Florida and other so I'm talking about states that I've invested in, and also other provinces that there are, the process is very different. And I think we have gone so far into like a bureaucratic mess that we need to change a particular process. And unfortunately, you have a lot of people from one side of the table who are saying, hey, look, well, I don't think so because we need our due process. It's not a due process. If you get a ticket, sure, you can go through the process and fight it, but you are automatically, required to pay. Right. And if you don't pay, what
happens? My paperwork already, Quentin. Like we're supposed to be talking about the non-payment of rent next, guy. Like, come on. Sorry. You got me smiling because I'm like, you don't even know about it, and you're already on that same.
Oh, I'm frustrated. That's what it is. It's a very frustrating process for sure.
So we'll keep going on the concept of landlord and tenant board right now. So we got the set time for each of the hearing. We think that logged in for at least a half an hour prior, and everyone has a time, right? So all this evidence that comes in from the landlord and the tenant, it's sent in 7 days prior. Our adjudicators need to be up top of it, reading the evidence that is being provided 7 days prior so that they can either ask questions or give the landlord, the tenant final moments in order to be able to explain their situation or their case. But it has to be set in a reasonable time frame. We're seeing hearings that are being dragged on for 3 hours. And it's going to the concept of just non-payment of rent, and people is still going through that long time frame. And now the people who are waiting, they're also now being adjourned for another day. So we have to kind of put that into context. Then we have expedited orders. So expedited orders, which seem to be a very reasonable, where you're filing to expedite the hearing. If it's for a legal act, if it's for safety, you're able to write to the landlord and tenant board to ask for a request to expedite it. Then they get to approve if it's going to be expedited or not. And then if they do approve it, then you should have your hearing within that 30 days. Again, going back to people selling their homes, the tenants are refusing to leave because on the paperwork it states, if you don't agree with this, you can fight this. And it really opens up the concept where we are needing the landlord and tenant board so much more than anything going black and white. Quentin, have you seen that in your situation, or Tom, with the tenants not wanting to leave before a closing date? Oh, you're on mute.
I was just saying I'll let Tom go in first because I know he has a situation where I know Tom, so I know some, a couple of things.
I've only had to do the N12 once, and actually the owners pulled the N12 off because I was selling the property. The tenant was severely behind, and it's the only way for me to get out of losing any more money. It was a single family home, but the tenants did not want to leave. And unfortunately, the new landlords took them on which they shouldn't have, and it took them 1.5 years to get them back out. And they were doing the N12. They almost lost a house.
Wow.
Yeah, and it's a broken system, right? And you know, if it almost goes against like property rights. And I want to like being like, what kind of a society are we where you like, if we're not a society where you actually own property, then what does ownership really mean in our society anymore? Like, does it not mean that we have ownership, or does it mean that we have ownership? I think we have to question how, like, what we're doing, and whether we want to move into this semi odd, I don't even know what to call it, system that seems you know, like things don't make sense. Like you know, when you rent something, you own it. That's not true, right? If I take the bus, I don't own the bus. Like it doesn't make sense. So I think we have to start really thinking about this. Like, I rent a car, so I own the car. It doesn't mean that I own the car.
And,
Right.
and that's the thing. Like, you want your own, you don't want your possession. Like, we know of a lady, I'm going to have her on again, but she's now still in the midst of still trying to evict her tenant. She had minor errors on the paperwork at the landlord and tenant board that resulted in her having to refile the N12 application over and over again because of her errors. She's had paralegal that made mistakes. And now it's going on 3 years. And she still is couch surfing herself and still not inside of her home. So even for landlords who want to get into it, or people wanting to rent it out for a couple of years, they don't want to do that because now they have a situation where they're like, what if I can't get the tenant out? You know, we could have at least housed somebody for a year, but instead they're trying to not even bother renting it out. So we're discouraging landlords from wanting to get into the industry, for the simple fact that when we have to address complicated situations, not paying rent, or a tenant that is causing havoc within the rental property, it's such a long process at the landlord and tenant board that I don't think anyone understands, especially when the tenants know the loopholes in knowing how to avoid the eviction process. Even for our landlord and tenant board. So you mentioned that Quentin has, waiting for 4 months before he even has a hearing date. And then when you do have your hearing date, they've now stated that it's going to take about 30 to 60 days before they get you the order. And you can't apply for the sheriff until you have an order in hand. So if you're taking that long for 30 to 60 days, we only got 1 month, last month's rent on hold. So these tenants are being able to abuse the system. I almost kind of work it as a shoplifting. The shoplifters are obviously causing, prices to increase. Now we have, our bad tenants are ruining it for our good tenants. And that's why we have to streamline this dispute resolution program a lot better than what they're doing. And we thought the changes that were happening, but we got a new associate chair, and now everything's kind of up in the air.
It's more like grand larceny, actually, than shoplifting. It's more on the level of grand larceny. Over $5,000 is not a very uncommon case.
So why can't we get the order? Why can't they get the order the same day as your hearing? You know what the situation is going to be. It's going to be A or B, and everything's now through email. So we're recommending that our landlords are able to get the order by email, and that's going to be running the system more efficiently so that we can get the orders in hand, and landlords are going to be able to seek their justice. Even if you got something to say, Quentin.
I think it's because it's the public system. Like, if we were through a private system, when I in Florida, for example, I had an eviction. I hired a sheriff directly, not a sheriff, an enforcement officer who basically went in and did the eviction for me, and they did it within 24 hours. I mean, not only do you have to wait for an order to be to issue to you, like 30 to 60 days, then you have to wait for the sheriff on top of that, and that could be another 3 weeks or 4 weeks.
You got the 11-day standard order. You get the 11-day standard. So you get the orders. Like, what are you asking? 11-day standard order. So you got to count 11 days from the day that they stamp the piece of paper before you can even go to the enforcement unit to file, pay $350 for them to file. And then you're still waiting. evict them because the sheriff has to go and give notice on the door to give to these tenants. And we're talking like there's like at least 6 months here where tenants know what is happening. They haven't paid rent and they wait exactly up until the sheriff is on their doorstep. And in which you still have to house their belongings for another 72 hours. So we're recommending again that they remove that clause as well.
I had something else. I don't know if anybody's run into this yet. Everybody knows the LTB rolled out the new portal where you have to send in your files.
Mm-hmm.
Has anybody found out the new portal is actually crashed?
The portal crashed?
Yep.
What?
I actually had to.
They've been asking people to refile because all the files are being lost.
Mhm.
I've been waiting for hearings since last November, and then when they rolled out the portal, there was a failure, and they've been asking people to redo it, and it's been an absolute disaster.
And it's not just that; they're asking people not even to use the portal. So I had to do an L4 the other day, and the portal wasn't working, so I had to hire a paralegal to figure out what's going on. There's actually an email that they have to send all the documentation to. So instead of me spending $186 to file, my bill was $775 to file an L4.
Wow.
And an L4 is for a tenant that missed the payment on a payment plan from an N4 L1 that the adjudicator gave them, saying, okay, they have a 1 year to pay back everything.
It's almost like a tenant occupation holding the landlords hostage, financially hostage.
But this is like, yeah, and this is a broken system. This part, the portal crashing and the paralegal having to make phone calls to figure out how to file, that's on the LTB side. That's not, I'm not blaming the tenant on that one, but I'm like, the system is just not working.
Even for the portal in itself, when they introduced it and thinking that, yes, it's great that we're having that mediation. But again, we're at the landlord and tenant board because communication broke down between the landlords and the tenants. You know, it's great that you're giving us a portal to talk and try to create a resolution between the two. But when they put you into this portal and expect you to stay there for 2 weeks before you're even getting on the docket to be put in for a hearing, now we've just stretched the 2-week time frame to be a lot longer for someone who is not hard on money. There's a lot of government programs that are out there that are helping our tenants in difficult situations. And this is where we're trying to say, give access to these programs for the service managers for each region to help tenants out in hardship situations. We have tenants who are downright abusing the situation, and that is what's causing now them to have to be brought to the landlord and tenant board, and giving 2 weeks for them to come to a dispute resolution is absolutely ridiculous. This is why it's really discouraging to the investors. And I think they look at the housing issues as an iceberg, but they're not looking underneath. They see the landlord and tenant board, they see how broken it is. They feel that hiring more adjudicators is going to solving the problem, but it's not. It's the rules and the procedures on how they're actually doing the intake, and obviously allowing the non-payment of rent to overflow the landlord and tenant board. So there needs to be more of a streamlined process in order to allow our landlords to seek justice for someone who is not abusing the system, but also taking advantage of a homeowner. And we have our small landlords that are struggling to buy these properties, to hold the mortgage, and rent needs to be paid. I just didn't know I was becoming a collection agency, or almost like a credit card. You know, when you're going to the landlord and tenant board now through COVID, they've actually stated that show us proof that you've tried to work with your tenant through this and work out a payment plan with them. So unless you show proof, then the landlord, the adjudicator, could issue a payment plan. And then when they issue that payment plan, if the tenant defaults, you still have to go ahead and apply to the board to have that enforced. So you can get to see how many layers of issues that are happening here. But even if you get your 11-day standard order, the tenants can apply to the board for a stay. And that stay puts the sheriff on hold until your back in the courts again to address a situation. Maybe the tenant didn't like the outcome, or maybe the tenant didn't show up. And because it didn't show up, they got to have grounds now to say, well, why didn't you show up? Well, I didn't get the notification. And now that's why I'm here today to vouch that now they want to work a payment plan. So you can see that it's very loosely of how they are handling the disputes. And we won't even get into the concept tonight about the adjudicators, because we got a lot to cover now.
And I feel sorry, like outside of, like, okay, well, this is all causing delays for the system, but it's hurting actually good tenants, because I actually have some tenants that are interfering with the reasonable enjoyment of another tenant, but they're scared to say anything for me to issue an N5, because they know it's going to take me a year to get a hearing date. And they're going, if we make a complaint, it's just going to get worse for that year. And I've actually have that at 2 different properties right now. And they're scared to make a complaint and for me to file the N5, because they know it's just going to be more harassment to them. And I can't do anything because I can't get it to the hearing.
Yep. And this is where, like, even unless we're going, there's lots of issues why you bring a tenant to the landlord and tenant board, but let's go on the concept of non-payment of rent.
Yep.
Even if you get your judgment, unless the landlords know about reporting the rent payments and the delinquency to FrontLobby, which goes to Landlord Credit Bureau and Equifax, trying to track down the tenant in order to serve them to bring the small claims court for garnishment of the wages, the tenant is not going to give you their address. And now the landlord and tenant board had created the L10 application, where you can bring a past tenant back to the landlord and tenant board up to 1 year from them vacating, but you have to serve them at their new address. Or you can serve them by other alternative methods, but it has to get approved by the landlord and tenant board. You know how quick they are in order to approve that. So again, another system that they created to backlog the system by taking past tenants on. And we have to say, well, we can't even serve them the proper documents. So another recommendation would be trying to, one, if they have a driver's license, they have to update their driver's license. And we should be able to try to serve our past tenants through maybe Service Ontario, so that they can serve the documents to the tenants in order to make sure that it's proper serving of the documents.
I don't even think they can handle that. I don't think they can do anything. I have no confidence in this, in the system as it is currently. I honestly think we need to move to a private system.
Yeah,
Like,
I'm up for that too.
I don't think that this public system I think we need to move to a totally different private system, because I know in a private system, at least we would things would be more efficient. And you know, I just don't see it happening. And what I'm seeing is so many investors leaving Ontario. More than I've ever seen in years in the past, going to the East Coast, going to Alberta, going to the US. So I've seen so many people leave, and it's really unfortunate, because those are the people that would be normally kind of adding a lot more rental stock and continue to buy or continue to create rental stock, either through like putting a basement suite in or like doing a land assembly and building something. They're just leaving. Like they're just going to other jurisdictions because the system doesn't work, you know, and they're going to go where they're treated better. And, you know, that's what happens. People will go where they're treated better, and they're not being treated well. And so what do you expect, right? You don't expect people to want to stay. And it's unfortunate, but that's, you know, that's the way it is. So.
No, you're exactly right. When you look at, you know, learning from the Alberta landlord community, understanding what happens for non-payment of rent, or what happens for the concept of how to deal with that in disputes. And they have one document. Here's your breaches. It's on one paper. We're killing a tree, and we have the whole alphabet lined up for each and every issue. So unless our elected officials and our landlord and tenant board staff has created a task force with that small landlord mindset in mind, because they're saying 70% of the housing stock is coming from the small landlords. So we need to have a proper system in place in order to do so. So we'll jump in now quickly to the non-payment of rent. So Quentin already had my brainstorming idea with Darlene and I. We're talking about removing that out of the landlord and tenant board. So I find the stats that came out from 2020 to 2021 extremely odd, for the simple fact that the applications that were received was 48,422. compared to 2019 to 2020, it was 80,874. So we'll take that in mind. I'll take the half if they want. I think it's a lot more than that. So I don't think their numbers are quite up there. And you go into the concept, and I'll put everything onto our social media page and of all the different solutions. So stay tuned to the public page. And the number one application for the landlords, of course, is to terminate and evict for non-payment of rent, which is 24,481 for this year. Previous year was 44,621. So, and that has been very consistent. It's always been the non-payment of rent. Now, a lot of people would say, well, maybe, the tenants, what's the tenants application? Tom, what would you think that the number one application would be for tenants? Because I know what the elected officials might think.
I would say T1.
T1. I just want to confirm on this one because
It's for tenant rights.
Yeah, so you got the tenant rights as T2.
It's a T2.
Yeah, T1, T2. Yeah.
T2. So you got the tenant rights, which is 3,145 compared to the following year, which was 3,072. And then you would think maintenance, right? So all these landlord licensing, short-term, they start talking about that at the safety and maintenance. Well, the maintenance factor was 1,795 because there's already a system in place. We have property standards that tenants can reach out to. They do have the landlord and tenant board in order to have their dispute. And they get money back from their rent, or they're giving an order for the landlord to get the work done. So you can see from having tenant rights in itself, and what would that cover? It's going to be for the landlords who are obviously feeding that giant at the landlord and tenant board. So when people have to see when a landlord is going to the landlord and tenant board for non-payment of rent, is first of all, the landlord has to give the tenant an N4 application on the second of the month. They can't even give it on the first. So on the second, and then you have to wait 14 days for the tenants to pay. And if the tenants don't pay, then you can file at the landlord and tenant board in order to bring them to the landlord and tenant board for eviction. Then after you're paying $186 to $201, you're now in that portal for 2 weeks, waiting to kind of see what happens between you and your tenant, see if you can come to an agreement. If you don't, now you're waiting at least 4 months before you're actually going to be in front of an adjudicator, and in which now it's your hearing day. These hearing days are you don't know what's going to happen. First of all, you got the application could be dismissed for minor errors, which we would encourage our adjudicators to make these minor errors with both parties available, that they would address it on the spot. They can also adjourn because they ran out of time. They can adjourn because of the tenant's request that they never got to seek legal advice, so they want to get it adjourned. Then they have that 11-day standard order like we talked about, where now they've granted it. Now it's going to take 11 days before you can even file for the sheriff's office. But again, we talked about that order of 30 to 60 days. So the tenants can file for their stay. It's taking 6 months. So we're going to do a breakdown of what I would recommend. I would recommend, and want your thought process on, everybody, even in the comments. So that's approximately 6 months. So let's go on step number 1. Tenant and dispute resolution officer. We have them now in the landlord and tenant board. They will receive a non-payment of rent application from the landlord via landlord and tenant board portal, but it's down now, so maybe just through the website or by email or at the drop-off center, such as Service Ontario. We have to make some accommodations there after 3 days of the tenant being past due. Step 2, the dispute resolution officer will contact the tenants via phone, text, email, or informing them about the landlord's application. And the way that they have the tenant information is that it's going to be included within the lease, the standard lease that we're all forced to file. So if it has the indication of how you want to be served, this is a way for our dispute resolution officers to reach out to the tenants and provide the landlord the best method of delivery. And the number that the adjudicate that the dispute resolution officer, they'll reach out to them and they would work out the contract of, okay, what's happening? It all has to be on that telephone. So the tenant shall update the landlord at any point during their tenancy of the contact information changing. Step 3 is after receiving a notice of the non-payment of rent, tenants are required to call or email the landlord and the tenant board customer service officer within 7 days of receiving the notice. Tenants have 14 days to show proof of rent payments or schedule a binding payment plan to be paid in full before the next month's rent is due. After a payment plan has been submitted by the tenant and the rent is still not paid, the landlord can file a standard eviction that will be issued by the landlord and tenant board, and a copy of the order will be mailed to both parties via priority mail or through the landlord and tenant board portal. If the tenant does not complete step 2 or 3 in the process, the landlord can file for an eviction order with the landlord and tenant board dispute resolution officer. And again, the eviction order will be sent priority mail for both parties. And step 4, once the order has been delivered to both parties, the landlord can file with the sheriff officer to process the eviction. The intent of this policy is to lessen the burden of the adjudicators and remove the backlogs of the hearings at the tribunals. Current legislation states within the Landlord and Tenant Act that it's illegal for the tenants to withhold rent. Allowing the hearing tribunal for why a tenant has not paid rent has contradicted the legislation and permits, even condones illegal activity. So this is where we kind of have, if we had worked it into this process, we can see it approximately taking 2 months to have non-payment of rent still being validated and heard of. But this is why we're going to be trying to remove the non-payment of rent from the board and have it more of a streamlined approach. What do you think?
You know what? I really think that anything is better than what we have, but I don't understand how I can be like, I see other states and provinces with similar size to Ontario, and I can get somebody out in 3 weeks, and it takes us even 2 months. Like, you know, we should be able to move the process along, and it's so much like, you know, I understand that we have to prove that, you know, they are not paying, but they should be proving that they are paying too, right? As you're pointing out in your process, right? So I think that we could, you know, we could take this, we could kind of shave this down a lot if we just had another parallel system, a private system, and got rid of all of this public BS that's, you know, it's just bureaucracy that has no purpose other than to waste time. I see red tape, and red tape just drives people away. I know it's not the politically correct answer. Like, I'm not, but I mean, do you want people to stay or do you want people to leave? Because obviously it seems you don't give, like, people don't care. So then they'll leave, right? People will, and you won't have your rents will go up. And there will be less product available, and you'll have less choice, and you'll have people there who have been there before, but, you know, they'll be driven out as well.
The bigger issue too is that sooner you're going to have less small landlords, which provide houses, and they provide duplexes. So that's kind of a family kind of a situation where the kids have a backyard, and everything's going to be moving to an apartment building. So our whole generation of children are going to be raised in apartment buildings only. Is that what we really want? I don't think anybody's really looking at the bigger picture here. The more you push out small landlords, those homes will not be available because nobody's going to be interested in providing those. So what do we want as a society is the next question.
And this is where we go on the concept of landlords leaving because the landlord and tenant board, we're on a 1.2% increase for utilities, for rent increase, which utilities are increasing, the taxes are increasing, maintenance, everything is increasing for the landlord. But when it's a business, the numbers need to make sense. So based on our consumption of rent increases, I'm really encouraging that we have a different format that needs to be followed based on landlords who have utilities included versus if it's a condo, in order to allow us to do the increases that are necessary necessary in order to keep the building looking great and obviously safe for the tenants. But when you have the tenants who are obviously concerned about the 1.2%, obviously landlords can try to apply to the board to raise the rent above the guidelines, but there's such stipulations there of the capital expenses that you need to be done that it doesn't always is gonna get approved, or it's gonna take a very long time to get approved as well. So we have to see why our landlords are pulling out of this industry, and this is why they're getting into it, is because the numbers are not making sense anymore, and the difficulties in dealing with difficult tenants are going to be obviously out there.
Well, why do we even need a hearing? That's the thing. Yeah. We have a hearing by default because of the process that we have, but in other jurisdictions, there is no hearing by default. There is only a hearing if there's a problem. So what we have a bureaucratic system that makes a hearing like a part of the process where it doesn't need to be part of the process. We eliminate hearings altogether unless there's a problem with the documentation. If there's no problem with the documentation, no hearing. Like, why is there any need for a hearing at all?
You guys are excited.
In Florida, I just sent it to the judge stamped it, and that's it. That's it. That's it. There was nothing. There was no problem. If there was a problem, the tenant could come back and do something about it. But that was it.
It's almost like the N12 when you're saying I need to move into it. I now have to have a hearing, and then there's a fine. There's a hefty fine of $50,000. So if I don't, and they have 2 years. They have 2 years to come back at us.
We'll come back then, but give it out. And then if they want to come back, then that's the different story. But the thing is, the hearing by default is the problem. We don't need a hearing by default. Yeah. We need a system that is a hearing by design somewhere down in the process, but not at the top of the process. Remove hearings altogether from the process and put it at the back end of the process as a way to fight it, but don't make it as a default. It's a ticket. You pay the ticket.
I'm going to use that exact same example. You get a speeding ticket. Unless you're challenging it, you have no hearing. You just pay it. It's done. It's over and done with.
That's it. That's it. You guys nailed it. See what happens when we have a
Did I pay my rent or didn't I pay my rent? There was if I don't pay my hydro bill, it goes to collections.
Yeah.
There's no hearing. It's just automatic. I got to prove that I paid it.
We got Melissa there.
Yeah. So my last hearing on an N4, I gave her a couple of weeks extra grace period. She had an issue with her check coming in. She's on social assistance, a very tough demographic to be renting right now. And then I said, you know what, she's not going to pay. I issued an N4. It took about 5 months to get to a hearing, which she showed up for and said, yep, I owe the money. No dispute, no reason, nothing. And I was very grateful for the adjudicator who issued an order right away. Standard order, of course, she gets another 11 days. And on the 11th day, she leaves. I'm also thankful I didn't have to get a sheriff. And, when we think of the affordability of housing, how tough it is, and how the cost of housing has far exceeded the growth of people's wages, especially for those who are receiving any kind of social assistance. This doesn't help that group. So if we really want to help them, it shouldn't take 6 months. Landlords are becoming so risk averse, as we've said, that they're leaving the province because it takes 5 months to evict someone who's got no excuse whatsoever for not paying other than they just didn't. How is that acceptable? And landlords are guilty until proven innocent, and tenants are innocent until proven guilty. And herein lies the problem, is that, there are so many great landlords and so many great tenants out there, but they really suffer because of the broken system that we have. And something needs to give, because if you think our housing crisis is bad now, you just wait.
Oh yeah. And that's what they don't quite understand. It's not that we're trying to speed up everyone being evicted quickly. It's just that it's not going to be so damaging to each landlord by having them in there that long, that they have to move on to other accommodations. And they do understand that because of the landlord and tenant board the way it is, many tenants are being discriminated against because the landlords have stepped up that screening process. But
yeah.
So we have to get, I love the concept, guys. Default, we got the whole concept and
no more hearings. No more hearings.
Well, and you know what? Like, there's so many. You look at the comparison between the applications from the landlords and the applications that are coming from the tenants at the landlord and tenant board. You know who's feeding the landlord and tenant board. So why don't you just kind of work a black and white, streamlined approach in order to have dealing with these disputes instead of wrapping it into a hearing, getting legal representation? It just becomes a mess, and it's something that the landlord and tenant board can't handle, or they got to start privatizing this thing out, because anything that the government's literally touching lately, it's like, oh, what are you doing?
I think we have a problem now. We're going to have a huge one, because if you really think about things, we haven't even hit all the baby boomers that are going to retire. And if there are people who have not been able to save up their retirement plans, or they've had issues throughout their life, and they end up going just on their old age pensions and stuff like that. If these people who are only making around $600 to $1,200 a month and rent's $1,500, like, we have to be proactive here, because this is not good. We have an issue now, but it's going to compound year after year after year. And we already know that the baby boomers are going to be retiring. We already know we're going to have an issue with them not being able to make enough money, because no matter what's going on, they're not increasing what these people receive. So therefore, they're not going to be able to pay the rent. We already know that. So how are we going to deal with it in another 5, 10, 15 years when all these people are going to be suffering, because they won't be, we already know they will not be able to afford rent.
And landlords are saying, like, here's our numbers. This is what keeps going up for us. And not even just that part of it in itself. It's the development of, developers are having their own type of issue.
Oh, that's ridiculous. And the requirements of, like, I understand you want to have like 5, 10, 15, 20% an affordable housing unit in a development. What does an affordable housing unit mean? I want to ask that. Does anybody actually know what that means? Does it mean like CMHC market rent? And what is CMHC market rent? Is that actually even affordable? And
there is no definition of affordability.
The closest definition there I've ever heard is 30% of your income. That's affordable housing.
Great.
30% of your income. So if you make, $1,000, 30% of your income, that's what you should be paying for housing.
And this is where we go into the concept of, with all the landlord and tenant board, what the requirements is for what's considered affordable. Then when the landlords try to do something affordable, the municipalities throw in, water billing, putting the cost on to the landlords for tenants delinquent utilities bills. Then they got landlord licensing because of safety issues. Even though you have a process, we're going to do landlord licensing. So there's going to be a fee for the license. And then there's going to be requirements that you need to pass, such as an inspection. So you have to pay for those requirements to be done. And then they're wondering why the investors are leaving their municipality based on landlord licensing. And then you have now short-term. So now they're going after short-term rental units for the licensing, because they feel that landlords are bailing out of long-term and getting into short-term. And meanwhile, short-term provides something very unique to the community, from tourism and providing clean, big accommodations for people who are traveling with families. But it's also that in between, for a tenant who, did get evicted, or a tenant that, had to leave because the landlord sold the property. They now have that short accommodation to do, or homeowners who are, the place that closed and their new home doesn't close since their property has now closed, and they have to leave. And they now want to go ahead and try to go after short-term rental licensing at the same time. So you can see how they are going after with tax. But again, they're just taking money away from the investor who could be putting it into their city. And now we're having more of a problem, because they now are trying to go after with the development of each municipality.
I think we should get KPMG to do an audit of the different departments within the housing group. Like go to the social justice tribunals and do an audit, because I have a feeling this is what they did with school boards too, when they ran amok with their budget and right, they would be taken over by the province. I would love to see another body come in and take over what's going on. Like federal government wants to push housing, and I know provincial governments want to do housing too, but they obviously can't organize their books or themselves. They probably need the federal government to come in and say, I'm sorry, you're not doing a good job. Let's get rid of whatever this is, or bring somebody else in. Maybe they need oversight, because they just cannot handle doing it on their own. So, or have another alternate system, have a private system beside it that allows you to get things done.
I think
Right.
they got too many hands in the cookie jar. We got the federal government, provincial government, regional government, and then you got municipal. And everyone's trying to crack down on the exact, affordability. I think it was Quentin who told me about making developers have to put 20% of their development into affordable housing. Talk about how
Oh yeah, well, you're basically what happens when you do that? You make the other 80% unaffordable, because the dollars still have to be there in in a project. It's not like it just disappears, and you think like any person who runs a business is just going to absorb it. It's nobody's thinking. Like they're just like, I don't know what they think. Like people are just do this for fun. Like they just work for fun. Like, is that what it is? So basically you make 20% affordable and 80% more unaffordable than before, and this is solving the problem, right? Because the problem is that a lot of these people don't have the background in the industry to be able to comment about it. They're not coming from the industry. They don't know what they're talking about, and hopefully they listen to things like this, where people who are in the industry, are doing it. And I love what Melissa said about the way that they perceive like tenants and the way that they perceive, but like, it shouldn't be like that. Like we're all trying to do the same thing. I don't know anybody here that wants to provide like lousy housing or unsafe housing or anything like that. Everybody wants to do the same thing, right? Like we all want to do that. So then why don't you take advice not from the people who are using the housing, but the people who are providing the housing? Wouldn't that make sense?
Either the little ones.
But even Quentin, you've got it right, because what's happening now is developers are paying in lieu of affordable housing. And it's such a small percentage. What happens is that goes to the municipalities, it goes into a kitty, and as it sits there in coffers, it takes a long time before the municipalities can actually do something with that money. And when they finally get around to it, prices have gone up and costs have gone up. And, they're trying to now manage their own development. So, and then you're also 10 years behind getting more affordable housing. So the whole system is broken. And, a lot of municipalities are doing waiving of development fees. What most people don't realize that those development fees have to be paid somewhere. So the people who end up being accountable are property taxpayers. And landlords pay property taxes. They pay property taxes on the rentals. So we're increasing the amount of taxes these landlords are paying because developers have the benefit of waived development fees. Then again, for the smaller landlords that are having to pay these higher property taxes, their rent's going to go up. So we're creating this circular effect that is going nowhere.
No.
Yeah, and even so, like with the wave, I've seen development fees like double, and some place go out like in a year. Like, okay, how? Why? Right? I'm finding like confusing information when it comes to that, and then just like the costs of everything have gone up so much already. So on top of that, why are I don't know why the development costs go up, but I guess there are other things that we could do, especially on the small landlord side, like get rid of single family zoning. Nobody's going to like it, and it will probably like steamroll a lot of people. But that way, if you have a single family on a street and you're able to safely make it into a 4-unit property, then make it into a 4-unit property, get rid of single family zoning. It'll upset everybody, and all the NIMBYs are going to be crazy, and everybody's going to be crazy.
But that could be done in have a better impact, because currently right now what we're seeing is a lot of really narrow, very tall townhouses. And so they're really congested, very compact. There's not enough parking. So people start parking on the boulevards. So the whole area looks really run down. But there are other solutions out there that the smaller builders, but especially on the suburbs, are not being allowed by most municipalities. You can have flex home, multi-generational homes. And what that means is you could actually have the developer build places and homes that already have the rental units in it, whether it be 1 or 3. And so this would also be an opportunity for new home buyers to have the opportunity of being instant landlords where they have income to help offset their new house purchase, especially now with the house increases increasing 40%, inflation going up, interest rates going up. They need that extra income. And the other thing is with these smaller homes, if we're not making them compatible for people, like taller, skinnier homes with so many stairs, it's not accessible. We have so many people, our seniors and stuff. So we need to have longer term homes, more life homes than these quick in and outs. Because the more that these houses are turning over, it increases all the taxes because all the costs, the real estate fees. So this is increasing our housing costs. So this is the ricochet effect of everything from the current system and policies. So we create flex home, multi-generational homes. People can be instant landlords, have opportunities to live in their house long-term, eventually move to the smaller unit. They can offset their pension income, and for the rest of their life, they have another income opportunity. And we're really missing out on that. And what's happening now is with the municipalities, we have to allow the zoning changes in the suburbs to accommodate that.
I know they get really into like not giving a permit for parking, right? Sometimes there's a situation where, hey, maybe we're going to market to someone who doesn't have a car and who needs a place to stay. And that's where the NIMBYism comes into, like, not in my backyard type of way, but it's like, do you want to see encampments that we have in our region, which is right across the street from a train station, and they say that they have no plans to remove them? We have now tent cities because of our philosophy of, we don't want it in our backyard, and knowing that there's that stipulation of what you can build. That it honestly, when we have a lot of people coming into our country, we have a lot of immigration that's happening, but we don't even have housing to even accommodate the people that are here now, alone the people that are coming. And then we'll get ourselves into where the way that the region of the landlords are now being called upon from our staff at the regional level to work with landlords to say, hey, we're going to have a head lease, our name's going to be on there, we're going to have the rent paid, the damages are going to be covered, and we're going to give you a mediator just in case the communication breaks down. And you look at the concept going, not quite my cup of tea, because of the concept of the landlord and tenant board and the way that it is trying to deal with a tenant that is difficult and trying to evict them. So you can give us all the money and in order to have it, which is great. And I think a lot of portable housing benefits should be available for our tenants in order to help accommodate the rising increase of what's happening. But they do have to understand that these head leases are not going to be for everybody, and that they have to think alternatively and help us advocate at that provincial level, because that's where a lot of our problems are going to be coming from.
And it doesn't matter how much money you throw at this problem if they don't fix the actual processes and what's actually wrong at the root of the issues here. It's just wasted dollars. Like you're going to keep on throwing more and more money at it, and it's not fixing anything. So let's fix the root of the problems. And like Quentin said, and it's things is, rent is due. Rent's supposed to be paid. It's in your RTA. It's an expectation. You have a contract. It's a lease. If there's any other issue, it should be no hearing.
Problem is we have a situation where we have government housing, and I think when people will talk about affordable housing, I think they really want more government housing where it's fixed based on your income. It's really it's almost like winning the lottery when you get accepted into a rental unit within the government, because there's no incentives to leave, and it's very affordable for them to be in there. What do you got to say about the whole regional side of?
Well, this is my kind of pilot project idea. So instead of, Kayla and I were talking before about that geared to rent income that's on Hespeler Road that was built a couple of years ago. $7.3 million was spent and made 35 units. If you give every single person, anybody in Cambridge, for example, that's where we're from, any person in Cambridge that wants to do a rental suite, $50K. The government gives them $50K. So everybody should be able to make suites with that. And then talk about this affordable housing. If you get $50K from a municipality or federal or provincial, then you make your income suite. How it becomes affordable is that the government will supplement your income by 30%. So for instance, if the median rent is $2,000 a suite, then the suite is $1,400. And then, so for that benefit of getting $50K for 5 years, that suite is 30% less than the market value. And then at that time, we get to put that market back on the roster as a regular rent. Because if we have more people built, the main problem of this whole thing is that we don't have enough units. So I was recently watching a documentary, and the only city that they mentioned that didn't have a housing problem or a housing crisis with buying properties was Tokyo, Japan. And the reason why is because there's no red tape in municipalities or the whole country itself. If you wanted to build something, you could build it. So there was a castle, there was a 6-unit building that was pink. Beside that, you had a garage, it was a business, and beside that, you had a small home. There's no restriction.
Just build it.
Build it up, because eventually that's what we're going to have to do anyways. So
build it because they're coming.
Exactly. So they don't have any problem with renting anything. They don't have any problem with housing crisis. There's no housing crisis whatsoever. So that's one of the things that's the only city that actually doesn't have this crisis. There's a crisis everywhere else. So maybe that's the answer. It has to be built. It has to be built. And the Ontario government had made one step towards this, because what it just recently passed was a law that says municipalities cannot say no to somebody requesting to build a secondary suite or a garden suite through all of Ontario. So even though the councils can disagree, the councils can say, okay, it can't be 3 bedrooms, it can only be 1 bedroom, or it can only be 2. They're still getting in the way, but they can't say no. So that has one of the changes that's happened in the Ontario government. Finally, Ford has wised up and said, okay, let's get this not in my backyard business over with.
We need clarity, though, because you've got your federal, your provincial, sometimes regional, and then your municipal information here. And no one's working together. Everybody has these ideas. And I've been speaking with developers, and I asked them, why are we not having more secondary units built as you're building these developments in these suburbs? And they say, oh, our municipalities are zoning. They won't let us. And it's like, okay, so if they let you, will you do it? No, cost too much money. Don't want to do it. So, everybody has an excuse. Everybody's pointing a finger at somebody else, but no one's actually sitting down and getting together and say, okay, let's get at it. Let's fix this and get rid of the red tape, and let's build the homes that we need, create the units that are necessary.
One thing I want to say is that, where have we seen rents go down? And we can say in recent history, we've seen rents go down in Toronto. Why did rents go down in Toronto? Well, because people moved out of the core and there were more housing units available. I don't like, one thing that I like what you said about giving everybody funds to be able to build these suites, but it's not necessary to add an additional requirement onto that for affordable or not affordable, because there's some sort of agenda that happens. I thought the agenda was more housing, because naturally what happens if you were to just have let's say whatever it is, some sort of incentive, whether it's 25,000, whatever it is, to build accessory units in a municipality, regardless of whether it's affordable or not, just doing that will encourage a large number of units to appear within that municipality. Why? Because investors go where they're treated best. They're going to see that there's funds available to them, then they are going to build. So you'll have smaller landlords who are going to build there because they're wanted. They know that they're wanted, because you want to go. You don't want to go to a place where you're not wanted, right? So if I know I'm going to be wanted there, I'm going to start doing those suites. And as an educator, I'm going to educate people. Hey, look, Cambridge really wants, they're giving everybody 25. Go to Cambridge and get this done, right?
But at the same time, when they had an incentive that it had to be the property had to be less than 500,000, and they would give you 25,000.
That's
again, and then
requirement.
Right, always a requirement. And the other kind of is give us all the rezoning and this and that. But when it comes down to dealing with the tenants, it's the management, because your property could be great and the money could be great, but unless you're able to manage the tenant with a very strong dispute resolution system in play, we're not going to encourage them to do it. Remember the baby boomers, you got the people who are, needing to downsize, and now the market doesn't make sense for them to downsize. But what does make sense is if we can create that incentives or that encouragement to create their secondary suite. But when they look at what you're being treated like in Ontario with the broken system of the Residential and Tenancy Act and Landlord and Tenant Board, why are they going to take advantage of the other offers that they have?
But it's also harder to build the secondary suites on an existing home because the soundproofing and with the way that the HVAC is made, you've got a lot of issues when you come to that. But if you can actually do it with new development, you can actually implement where the HVAC and everything is set up so the houses are sealed so that the noises and the smells from each aren't being transferred, because that causes a lot of issues and why so many people don't want to actually have these secondary suites within their existing homes.
And you know what?
When you build them correctly, you can eliminate most of that noise. Quentin started off doing what I specialize in, and I specialize in building secondary suites. I just finished another one just recently, and we're all experts in real estate. And the problem with the government is they're not experts, and they're not willing to listen to experts. We can go build a completely legalized suite, make it pristine for anywhere between 75 to 100,000. In the federal government, the money that Justin just set aside, he was going to cost him $250,000 per unit. That's 2.5 times. You know, it's going to take them a lot longer to build them than they can actually. By the time they build them, the demand's going to be higher. We can be doing it faster and putting them in mixing it in within other residential. You do not want to cluster affordable housing in one group because it gives no expectation or no drive to improve that area. And that's the areas that we usually find that have the highest crime. And I'm not saying all people that are in affordable housing are bad, but they get that stigma of they're lazy, and they're not. Some people just run in a hard spot at times, and the governments just don't listen to experts. Quentin and I were on a call not too long ago because Oshawa wanted to bring in licensing. And all the counselors, one person had to excuse himself because he has a rental unit. He's the only one that should be on that panel to make that decision because he actually knows what's going on. The rest of the boneheads had no clue. They're just listening to other people complaining. And they kept comparing student rentals to our long-term rentals. Two completely different cohorts. That's showing their inability to understand the true problem and listen to experts. They're going after votes, and they're not really trying to get to the bottom of the issue and solve it.
Okay, guys, I hate to wrap it up. I promised you guys an hour. I totally love you guys for taking a little bit longer.
This would take like years. Like
it's going to be. It's been taking me 12 now just to really number one, let's get the non-payment of rent.
14 days, Quentin. 14 days. You're out.
So we just have to really kind of narrow in on the concept of fixing our dispute resolution program. I think a lot of our landlords are obviously the ones suffering from it. We're not going to get ourselves anywhere with trying to be a part of a class action lawsuit that will run you out of time and money. I've been down that road. I've talked to many lawyers that have been in that. This is about fixing it from within, really getting really intuitive to what's happening at provincial, federal, and municipal politics. The election is coming. I highly encourage you to reach out to these candidates and your sitting MPP in order to understand where their goals are and what they're planning to do to increase that housing supply. And is it going to be more restrictions, or is it going to be cutting red tape? I am going to be putting out an invite to elected officials to join me on the show in order to give us an idea of what their platform is. And so that way we can see which party is where. Obviously, we know who's going to go where, but we'll have everybody on just to give us their thought process, and everyone can ask them some questions. And to be the best of it, just because it's obviously just trying to wrap this up in an hour, we have so many more, and it just got to come out, and it's live. So it's really struggling, but we want to implement some of these changes that we're recommending and how it could be good for both the good landlords and the good tenants, of course, the taxpayers. Taxpayers cannot afford to keep building, managing, maintaining, and subsidizing government housing. You need to be working with the small landlords, but in order to work with them, you need to understand their issues and work with them on an incentive program that actually works. Don't spend your time and effort into creating these programs that are not being picked up by investors to work with these municipalities. So I would like to say I've been doing some thinking throughout this time frame in the last couple of weeks, based on being online and everyone being shut down, that we're going to be hosting a conference in Cambridge for 2022. I got a lot of questions from people like, hey, are we back doing our conferences? Because it's not just a conference of, growing your portfolio. It's about learning the landlord and tenant board, talking about the issues, talking about implementing those solutions, inviting our elected officials to be a part of this from all levels of government, and making it an engagement where it's bringing the community together. And that's what we do within our conferences, where we make it fun and we make it a community engagement. So we're going to have the dinner and prizes, entertainment, inviting our elected officials, and being able to celebrate this event of what we've been working on for 12 years, is bringing the investment community together so that we can work together at a solution and help each other out, because it's very complicated for many, and we're just hoping to continue advocating for that balance that is needed, because we're all paying for this as taxpayers. So I really want to really invite everybody to be a part of this conference that we're having. I'm no Ellen DeGeneres, but I do want to hand out as many prizes as I can. So if you do want to offer a prize for the conference, please reach out to me. I would love to be able to give back to the community, because we work hard. We landlords are the solution. We just need to have the proper tools in our toolbox in order to help us maintain a solid foundation to keep the supply of housing growing. Instead, we're seeing it just decreasing. Anyone have to say anything before? I can't see it.
No hearing. No more hearing.
Oh, you guys have any last minute advice for any elected official that be watching? Hopefully everyone who's viewing, send us a link. Let your elected officials to sit down with a cup of tea and listen to how the community is understanding things, and obviously affected by each and every red tape that they put up for us. What do you got to say, Quentin?
Listen to some experts, and then that'll probably help, instead of listening to the the people who are causing the problems.
Perfect. Connie?
Well, we have to include the landlords in the conversations, and we have to work on new ways and new processes, because obviously the old ones are not working.
Melissa?
This is the only business a person cannot retire from, like not even if you're dead. It's you're stuck being a landlord forever, even against your will. And I think we really need radical change. We need to turn this thing on its head, because we need to incentivize and not penalize. That's it, period.
Perfect. Tom?
I think that the government needs to listen to experts, and it's not just landlord experts. I actually do believe they need to listen to the tenants as well. They're the ones are our clients. So, but they need to listen from the concept of how is it going to benefit all tenants, not just one subsection of the tenants, because they're really only protecting the bad tenants, which is 5%. They're not helping the 95% of the tenants. And let's just listen to experts and get this stuff fixed, make the radical changes, make the hard decisions, because it's not going to please everybody, but in the long run, it will make everybody better off, both landlords and tenants.
Darlene?
Treat it like a business, not a charity.
Yeah. And this is where we have to look at all levels of government, what they're doing, different levels of the Landlord and Tenant Board, the Residential and Tenancy Act, municipal bylaws and policies, the region, government housing, government programs, OW, ODSP, or immigration. There's so much levels to this issue that I don't think our elected officials or their staff are equipped So we need to have that roundtable discussion pretty frequently. We need to have a task force that is with that small landlord and even tenants in mind, because we have an accessibility issue. And we need to be able to open the doors for a lot more people. Instead, they're being shunned out, and now we're seeing a huge issue with our government housing. So we're going to bring this community together, one step at a time, one elected official, one staff member. So we're really excited to be able to announce that we are going to be doing this conference in October of 2022, and I'm excited to bring all your faces face to face again, because I know I have so much fun doing these conferences with you. And honestly, Ontario Landlords Watch members are the ones who are really helping us drive the different solutions out of there. We have to think out of the box, and in order to make that fair and balanced housing system for good landlords and good tenants. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks.
Bye.
Take care.